Coming in number 5, we've got horse meat. You know, a lot of shady stuff goes on in the food industry. One would hope that this kind of nonsense would be dealt with appropriately when it came to feeding children, but it's not always the case. I guess the whole feeding just children horse meat is more of a joke than anything, but check this out. Back in 1994, the 100th episode of The Simpsons aired, titled Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass Song. It tells the tale of a woefully mismanaged public school. What else is new, right? Well, during all of the chaos where principals were fired, hired, refired, and rehired, we get a quick gag concerning some equine cuisine. Springfield Elementary's lunch lady tossed a lovely assortment of assorted horse parts, now with more testicles, into a pot to be turned into some sort of meal for the students, whatever that may be. That kind of joke has been long running, with many folks assuming that thanks to low budgets, schools have to resort to less than stellar foods. So, horse meat for the kids. However, one might think that corporations whose profitability relies on serving the food they advertise might think twice before serving horse meat in something that isn't labeled horse meat. Not quite the case. In 2013, almost 20 years after that episode of The Simpsons aired, there was a huge food-based scandal in Britain. Can you guess what kind of meat was found in all sorts of supposedly pure beef? You got it. Horse. And this wasn't just happening at dinky little school cafeterias or independent burger joints stationed near wharfs. We're talking about Taco Bell serving something that wasn't actually all beef. Which actually isn't that surprising, but still! Taco Bell, Bird's Eye, and Brakes all had products that claimed to be all beef, but ended up having traces of horse meat throughout. Jeez Louise, that's not necessarily something you want to hear after scarfing down a beef skewer or a Crunchwrap Supreme. So a joke about cheaping out at the expense of the American school system actually turned out to be a pretty real situation where some corporations that should know better cheaped out. Way to go, team. Coming in number 4, we've got mutant tomatoes, and not the teenage ninja kind. We're talking about nuclear crops here. Enormous, bulbous, strange growth-ridden plants you probably don't want to consume. But what if they're addictive and have major profit-reaping capabilities? What then? Let's start with the Simpsons story and then move on to what happened in the world after. In the episode E.I.E.I.D.O., Homer finds himself at the forefront of a potentially brand new industry, tobacco. After skipping town to avoid a duel with a gun-toting colonel, Homer and his family settle down at his dad's old farmhouse. He buys some tomato and tobacco seeds from Sneed's Seed and Feed, formerly Chuck's, and tosses them all over the property. After introducing some plutonium to the works, the two crops become one, producing a highly addictive plant known as tobacco. Part tomato, part tobacco, all despicable. The plutonium causes this stuff to grow even bigger than it would have otherwise, reaching extremely large sizes and causing anyone who eats some of it to become addicted. Sure, the taste is bad, but think about how relieved you'll feel after you eat one every hour for the rest of your life. It's probably better for you than smoking, too. The development of this habit-forming food causes a whole lot of other issues, including but not limited to corporate espionage, rampaging farm animals, and a helicopter crash. So what did this predict? Enormous, potentially dangerous crops spurred on by the introduction of nuclear waste. In 2013, a bunch of Japanese farmers started noticing that some of their crops were growing disproportionately large. In addition to their size, these crops also developed odd properties, like additional growths that didn't match the plant's usual shapes. All this strange stuff was happening relatively close to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, where 2 years earlier a meltdown occurred. Now, these huge fruits and veggies aren't ironclad proof that the nuclear waste caused excess growth, but it definitely paints a vivid picture now, doesn't it? We'll see what other changes occur over the next little while, and maybe even see the development of a new tobacco-tomato hybrid. It would be a better way to wean off smoking rather than vaping, that's for sure. Coming in at number 3, boring VR tasks. Video games were supposed to transport us to far-off worlds full of colorful characters and exciting things to do, right? A vision of the future where anything is possible. You could be a pro athlete, fly around on a hoverboard, pilot insane spacecraft, and more. Well, that was what the vision of video games was. Most cartoons that featured gaming would have characters teleported inside the software, taking on the roles of player characters in all sorts of far-out scenarios. However, The Simpsons saw right past that era of camp and craziness and got right into the meat and potatoes of today's legendary activities. Some popular games out there don't require you to shoot 100 aliens or ride your horse into the abyss. Some are just farming simulators or walks through the woods. Hell, there are even truck driving and food planting and serving sims that you can play in VR. Folks had such lofty aspirations for virtual reality, from the fever-dreamy interpretation of Lawnmower Man to lunatic life sims. But here we are, with some not quite consumer-ready tech and a whole lot of mundane tasks made interesting by their virtual components. Maybe the Simpsons knew that life was only gonna get drearier, and good old-fashioned hard work would have more appeal than sitting in front of a spreadsheet all day. Would you rather trim a hedge on a sunny day or input data in a cubicle? The choice is yours. Coming in at number 2, Arnold Palmer. Now this one is a little morbid. I'm sure most folks out there know about the legendary refreshing beverage named after the equally legendary golfer. Half iced tea, half lemonade, the Arnold Palmer. Well, as it turns out, a joke made by the writers of The Simpsons lined up a little too well with a real-world event. During the premiere of the 28th season, titled Monty Burns' Fleeing Circus, Homer decides to load up a water gun with said famous beverage. When Marge asks what he's doing, he tells her that he's going to Arnold Palmer Lenny, implying that he would soak his pal in the liquid. Now, this doesn't seem all that freaky, right? A simple gag pulled by TV's favorite simple dad. The thing is, on the day the episode aired, the golfer Arnold Palmer passed away. Of course, this could be chalked up to sheer coincidence, but what are the odds that they scripted, voiced, animated, and aired that joke, and it ended up being on the same day as Palmer's unfortunate passing? The world works in mysterious ways, that's for sure. And finally, at number 1, Disney owns Fox. It's almost as if the writing was on the walls for years. We like to think we've got plenty of choice when it comes to the media we consume these days, but most IPs are owned by a constantly shrinking set of companies. But wow, has Disney ever taken over a lot of stuff? And Fox was right on the money too, some 20 years before the merger actually went through. In the episode When You Dish Upon a Star, there's a quick visual gag where we see the 20th century Fox logo in all of its resplendent glory, but there's a little addendum to it. Underneath the shiny gold letters, you can see that it is now a division of Walt Disney Co. Somebody saw the way entertainment companies were growing and predicted a buyout way ahead of time. I guess it only makes sense, but wow. An insidious collection of IPs to constantly market and remarket to the increasingly online demographics of tomorrow was predicted in the 90s. I doubt they would have seen the streaming revolution coming, but the way that Disney has always been protective of its image as well as immensely profitable kinda made this one a no-brainer. Although, we only say that through hindsight. Whoever wrote this gag had foresight like no other.
Number 5 on this list is stolen cooking grease. So this one's honestly just pretty weird, guys. Cooking grease, something that to 99.9% of all individuals is just gross and should be thrown out pretty much immediately, was actually part of a bit of a thieving scandal. In the 1998 season 10 episode 1, Lord of the Dance Simpsons episode, Homer decides that a great way to make a quick buck is to steal a bunch of cooking grease and then sell it. This is a cartoon and Homer is like really freaking dumb, so we can suspend our disbelief and buy into this for 22 minutes, but never would I have actually thought this get translated to real life. In the city of New York, there's been an overwhelming rise of grease theft. The New York Post writes, "The theft of used cooking grease from city restaurants has risen in recent years thanks to the demand for yellow grease, a valuable ingredient in biodiesel," say eatery owners and licensed oil collectors. The thieves troll the streets in unmarked vans and swipe the oil going for $1 a gallon on the streets from unsuspecting restaurant workers. The oil can be converted into yellow grease, a commodity used to make biodiesel. The city's Business Integrity Commission records show that about 30 licensed grease haulers who pay restaurants to collect the grease to refineries. Haulers pay around $2 a gallon to lug the lard from the kitchens to turn it into diesel fuel, animal feed, or even jet fuel. In 2011, city haulers collected 8.3 million gallons of yellow grease from the 17,000 city restaurants. Like, is this not the most ridiculous thing you guys have ever heard? People going around in vans and vacuuming up gallons upon gallons of cooking grease to then turn into actual jet fuel. Like, this sounds like something straight out of a cartoon, and it actually was. Number 4 on this list is rigged voting. This one is sadly way too close to real life, guys. In 2008, The Simpsons released an episode episode where it had Homer voting for the next American president. His two options were Barack Obama and John McClane, who were the two actual options in real life going for presidency at the time. In the clip, Homer very clearly clicks to vote for Obama, but the machine that he's using turns his vote into a vote for John. A funny gag at the time that pokes fun at the legitimacy of elections and voting, but not so funny when it actually happened in real life 4 years later. Fast forward to the next election. Now it's between Obama and Mitt Romney for the American presidency. This time the voting machine gag actually happens though. A voting machine in Pennsylvania had to be removed because it kept changing any votes for Obama to Romney. There was a full-on video that surfaced on the internet of somebody trying to vote for Obama but just actually couldn't because of the machine. This was easily fixed and didn't cause too much tampering in the actual election, but then fast forward again 4 more years. Remember the scandal about the potential Russian involvement in the election? About how they rigged the vote and gave Donald Trump an unfair advantage? Now that's never actually been 100% confirmed, but if it did actually happen, then one could argue that The Simpsons inadvertently predicted that too. It's not quite the same as a busted voting machine, but if it did actually happen, then it definitely would have been tampering with the election, which was the whole thing The Simpsons were making fun of in the first place. Hopefully from here on out we can just have some solid, non-messy elections and keep this Simpsons thing as it was intended to be, just a funny joke. Number 2 on this list is an Ebola outbreak. Ebola is a very serious disease and something that shouldn't be taken lightly. This is pretty much common knowledge now, but back when The Simpsons talked about it, it wasn't nearly as well known. The 3rd episode of the 9th season, called Lisa's Sax, was released in 1997 and has The Simpsons predicting an Ebola outbreak. In that episode, Marge tells Bart, who isn't feeling well, that he should read a book called Curious George and the Ebola virus. This has led people to believe The Simpsons actually predicted the outbreak. Now, just having a book called that isn't necessarily a prediction, but I do want to stress that it really wasn't talked about that much back then. Back in the 90s, it wasn't big news and not a ton of people knew about it. That's why when from 2013 to 2016 there was a major Ebola outbreak in Africa, people looked to The Simpsons as knowing something that we didn't. This wasn't just a small thing either, it was a full-on epidemic for several years that ravaged Western Africa, causing major loss of life and some serious socio-economic disruptions. Let's hope that they don't make any other epidemic predictions soon, because I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're pretty much done with that. Number 1 on this list is the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack. According to Google, Siegfried and Roy were a duo of German-American magicians and entertainers best known for their appearances with white lions and white tigers. It was composed of Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn. This was one of the most successful acts in the world for quite a while and garnered a massive audience worldwide. Sadly, there was a horrible tragedy that happened in 2003 during a show. Wikipedia writes, during a show at the Mirage on Horn's birthday on October 3rd, 2003, a 7-year-old white tiger named Manticore attacked Horn. As part of the act, but veering off script, Horn held his microphone to Manticore's mouth and told him to say hello to the audience. Manticore responded by biting Horn's sleeve. Horn swatted the tiger and barked "release," while standby trainers unsuccessfully attempted to distract the cat with cubes of meat. Possibly incited by Horn's retreat, the tiger leapt at Horn, swinging at his legs and knocking him off of his feet. As trainers rushed in from offstage to assist, Manticore bit into Horn's neck and dragged him off stage. Trainers got the tiger to release Horn by spraying him with CO2 fire extinguisher canisters, the last resort available. The attack severed Horn's spine, resulting in massive blood loss, and severely injured other parts of his body, permanently impairing his motor and verbal abilities. He also had a stroke either before or after Manticore dragged him off stage. This incident, as scary as it was actually predicted by The Simpsons though in season 5, episode 10. In that Simpsons episode, both of the entertainers are viciously attacked by their tiger during one of their acts. This episode aired in 1993, which was 10 years prior to the tragic incident that happened in real life. I guess it wasn't that far off of a stretch to imagine a show with a bunch of large jungle cats potentially going wrong, but it still is really sad that they got this one right. Number 5 on this list is the Greek financial crisis. Greece, one of the most beautiful places in the world. A destination on pretty much all of our vacation lists, I think. Back in 2015, it got a whole lot cheaper for us to go there if we wanted to as well, because the Greek economy basically completely collapsed. Now, Greece for a while had been looking like they were in trouble monetarily speaking, but in 2015, it all came crashing down. Investopedia says, in 2015, Greece defaulted on its debt. debt. While some said Greece simply fell into arrears, its missed payment of 1.6 billion euros to the International Monetary Fund was the first time in history a developed nation has missed such a payment. So that was a really bad thing to happen and basically meant that Greece was bankrupt. Millions of Greek citizens lost their jobs during this time. It was also a time where a lot of Greek people were leaving the country because they simply couldn't get any jobs in Greece. Well, believe it or not, an issue as complex and devastating as this one was predicted by The Simpsons. Or at least it was predicted to some extent. NME writes, the financial crisis in Greece rumbled on in 2015, hogging headlines for weeks, but the US show saw things going awry years before. Just witness this small subtle gag in the 2013 episode Politically Inept with Homer Simpson. As Springfield's most lovable buffoon is being interviewed on TV, a news ticker flashes on screen below with the headline, Europe puts Greece on eBay. So it's not a direct prediction stating that the entire country's economy is going to fall apart, but putting a country on eBay paints a pretty clear picture, I'd say. Number 4 on this list is the three-eyed fish. Three-eyed fish, not really something that I think anybody wants to see. Kind of something that you would expect to be swimming around Dr. Frankenstein's aquarium if he ever had one. Well, The Simpsons took it a step further. NME says, in a 1990 episode, Bart catches a mutated three-eyed fish in the local river, a nod to the pollutant effects of the town's nuclear power plant. Over 20 years later, in 2011, a real-life fish and practically a dead ringer for its cartoon counterpart was discovered in an Argentinian reservoir located near a nuclear facility. Now, there are a number of reasons why nuclear power has some question marks associated with it, but like, this is a major one right here. Literally a three-eyed fish, guys. And that's just one of the fish that we've seen. Think about how many other fish that are waiting to be found down there that have like legs growing out of them and stuff like that. It also makes you think about some of the horrible disasters that we've seen from power plants like this before. Obviously, Chernobyl is the one that comes to mind. If this fish happened to have this happen to it by just being around a plant, then think about what happened to the animals near that disaster. Like, we could have had a full-on mutant creature roaming around that area and just have no idea about it. Hopefully The Simpsons don't predict any more mutant stuff, because I don't want to be doing a video about how they got that right as well. Number 3 on this list is robot librarians. There's been a large movement recently, a push I guess, about how robots or automated machines are going to be taking our jobs. 100 years ago, if you would have brought this up, people would have thought that you're crazy, but nowadays it's a real thing that's happening. In fact, it's already going on. Car manufacturers, for instance, an industry that used to have a ton of jobs for people 100 years ago, is almost all machine operated now. At the end of the day, they're just simply quicker, more efficient, less accident prone, and don't need to get paid hourly. These robots are taking all kinds of jobs other than just car manufacturers as well. The Simpsons, believe it or not, actually predicted one of them. NME says, another highlight from Lisa's wedding here, as Lisa's college librarian turns out to be an android and one who violently burst into flames too. There haven't been any blown circuit board disasters in Chicago yet, but in 2011 it was announced the city's new Joe Enrica Mansueto library would have a robotic librarian who'd helpfully retrieve books for you. You know, I always thought about librarians as having a human element to them, but I guess robots would know more about books than we would. I don't know though, still feels super weird and creepy to have a robot explain to you what a book is about or something. Also, literally taking human jobs right now. Like, if they can do a librarian's job, then why can't they do a teacher's job or a business person's job or my job? Ugh. And finally, number 1 on this list is President Trump. Regardless of your political views, predicting a president literally decades before they actually become president is kind of a scary ability. That's exactly what The Simpsons did though with President Trump. NME says, The Simpsons writers predicted Donald Trump would become president back in 2000. The episode, Bart to the Future, envisions the futures of Bart and Lisa Simpson. The latter, with an uncanny resemblance to Hillary Clinton, has become the first female president of the United States. As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump, she says to her advisors. They then inform her that her predecessor has bankrupted the country. So Lisa is literally alluding to the fact that Trump was the president and that during his presidency, he left the country in financial shambles, and now she needs to dig him out of the hole. Not totally far from the truth, honestly. How the hell did The Simpsons know this? Was this just luck of the draw? Clearly, The Simpsons must know some stuff that we don't, folks. Look out for their next presidential prediction. It might just come true.
Number 2, the NSA. And Tom Hanks a little bit. Okay, take your brain back to 2007. Remember the Simpsons movie? Absolute classic. Basically, just 2 hours of The Simpsons on fire. Some of the best jokes they've ever had, taking the show we love to its biggest extremes. After Springfield's toxic waste problem becomes too much to bear on the rest of the country, President Schwarzenegger, and don't worry, that's not the prediction, decides that the best solution is to place a big glass dome over the city of Springfield to contain the problem. The Simpsons escape and find themselves on the run. Now, funny enough, in this scene, Bart takes a dig at Disney, wearing a bra on his head to look like Mickey Mouse, and saying he's the symbol of an evil corporate overlord. If only he knew. Marge is talking to Lisa about how they need to get to Seattle to tell everyone of the plot to destroy Springfield, and Lisa shushes her mom, warning her not to speak so loudly because people could be listening in. Well, Marge reassures her that no one is listening, until it's revealed that a dummy conductor has been listening and broadcasting the entire conversation to the NSA. Now, government surveillance was already a pretty popular conspiracy around the time the movie was made, but after the revelations of 2013, when it came out that the NSA was in fact doing that exact thing on the general population, a funny joke now seems prophetic. There's another prediction in the Simpsons movie that matches up pretty amusingly well with our real world. Near the end of the film, Tom Hanks films a promotional video for the US government and says, "The US government has lost its credibility, so it's borrowing some of mine." Pretty funny joke featuring America's dad. But then, in 2022, this basically happened like for actual real, when the current administration ran an anniversary campaign ad featuring Tom Hanks narrating the events of the first year of the Biden administration. Everyone raced to Twitter to comment that, yep, Simpsons did it first. The Simpsons had hit the nail on the head once again. Number 5, the Titan submersible. No doubt you have recently heard of the Titan sub and the tragedies surrounding it. I mean, it's pretty much the only story that's been in the news for the last 2 weeks. After it imploded in an attempt to carry passengers to the wreckage of the Titanic. Now, before we knew the exact extent of what had happened early in the story's development, many were very concerned about the vessel's oxygen supply, and for some, in classic Simpsons fashion, we're convinced that The Simpsons might have eerily predicted the scenario with an unsettling accuracy. In the 2016 episode Simpson Tide, we follow Homer going on an expedition reuniting with what he thought was his long-lost father Mason, a millionaire explorer. The two of them go on an expedition underwater, searching for the treasure of a sunken ship in 2 little personal subs, similar to how 2 passengers on the fateful sub were a father and son, similar to the episode. Now, that's one thing. But what makes this kind of interesting is that this episode was produced by Mike Reiss, the long-running showrunner of The Simpsons, who also happened to be a passenger of the Titan submersible in the past, not just once, but 3 times. So it's entirely possible that this episode was inspired by his own experiences. Mike Reiss, infinitely braver person than me, been on the sub 3 different times, and said that they almost always lost communication. Recently, he spoke out about his experiences. Obviously, everybody wants to talk to him as he has been on this one thing that's dominating the headlines, and on BBC Breakfast recently, he shared saying he was not very optimistic about the missing passengers having been found alive, saying they knew what they were getting themselves into. Rice was quoted as saying, "I got on the sub and at the back of my mind was, well, I may never get off this thing. That's always with you. If it's down at the bottom, I don't know how anyone is going to be able to access it, much less bring it back up." Now, in the episode of The Simpsons, obviously Homer is fine because he's a cartoon character, but tragically, the passengers on the sub were not recovered. A very, very grave reminder of how scary undersea travel can be. Number 4, the Stonecutters. Coming up at our next point is going to be about the Stonecutters, the secret allegiance that runs Springfield. Now, season 6 has got to be one of the best seasons of The Simpsons out there. There are a ton of classic episodes. Got the Who Shot Mr. Burns plotline, but one of the more memorable episodes is Homer the Great, where a downtrodden Homer feels that he has no place in this world or higher meaning until he finds himself involved in a gentleman's club called the Stonecutters, a secret centuries-old order Homer finds himself at the center of when he is revealed to be the prophesized chosen one of the group. This obviously sounds incredibly similar to the very well-known Freemason organization. Stonecutter, Mason, Masons work with stones. Pretty easy to figure out what they're alluding to. Are the Simpsons writers trying to reveal something? As it turns out, the Stonecutters are far more than just a place for the guys to play dominoes and kick back. They're a clandestine lobby group pulling all the strings behind the scenes. The Stonecutters are behind everything. They rig the Oscars, they bury the electric car, they keep the Martians under wrap, and they find consistent work for 80s icon Steve Gutenberg. The Stonecutters are a good stand-in for any sort of conspiracy you believe. Freemasons, Illuminati, any New World Order can fit in nicely to this. The Stonecutters are a very obvious stand-in for various conspiracies like the Freemasons, the Illuminati, New World Order, and if you believe any of those conspiracies, and I bet you do if you watch these videos, allegedly they run the world behind the scenes. Always rumored and long thought that they're controlling everything from the shadows. Could the Simpsons writers be letting the public know about their sinister dealings? How these organizations work? Could Homer's secret society of monkeys from the end of the episode be pulling the strings? Maybe. Now, if I was a secret cabal that had made the world into my puppets, one of the first things I would do is discredit all the theories about my organization by putting them into episodes of a beloved animated comedy show, making it seem like you'd have to be an absolute kook to believe in it. But that's just what I would do if I was part of a very secret organization that was running the world. Not that I am, of course. Number 2, an economic crash. Look, things are not doing too great economy-wise lately. I don't know where you live, but I bet it's not doing too great there. You tried to buy butter recently? Trip to the grocery store just ain't what it used to be. Maybe the Simpsons writing team knows more than they're letting on. In a recent-ish episode from the 24th season, Homer goes to prep school. Homer meets a new friend, voiced by Tom Waits, bizarrely enough, okay. The man overhears Homer talking about how he doesn't think society could survive a collapse, and the man agrees with him and warns Homer that soon there'll be an economic disaster and the supermarkets will collapse and the United States will fall too. Homer insists that America can't fall because it's a strong empire like Rome. The man then shows Homer an unspecified vague video with no dates or anything that warn him of a vague impending apocalypse. You've probably seen a lot of videos exactly like that on TikTok. Homer then joins their cult-like group of survivalist preppers, prepping for what they believe to be the inevitable apocalypse. Now, this is a very, very real phenomenon. Preppers are a recognized group. There was a whole reality show about them for a while, so that's all very real. Whether or not there's an incoming collapse, like immediately, well, who's to say? I'm not an economist, I'm just a YouTube host. So all I can say is that I've noticed butter and honey are a lot more expensive than they usually are, and those YouTube ad dollars ain't coming in the way they used to. In the end of the episode, Homer inadvertently triggers an event that causes a collapse in Springfield, but to his and the preppers' dismay, society bounces back like nothing happened. So maybe we don't need to be so worried. Society recovers. That's a beautiful message. As long as we have each other and a couple people remember some good jokes from The Simpsons, I think we'd survive an apocalypse. Although there was no electricity, I'm not really sure how we'd log into our Disney Plus accounts and stream the episodes. And I mean, if there was no electricity, you couldn't watch Top 5 Scary. So let's try to avoid any full-scale societal collapses for a bit then. I actually don't mind society so much. I don't think it's so bad.